I want to introduce David Yang, Vice President of Digital Transformation at ICF. He's a volunteer at the Prince George's County Fire Department, which I find very interesting. He's an executive fellow at the Robert E. Smith School at the University of Maryland, and he is someone you absolutely need to know if you work in the Washington, D.C. area. So thank you for joining me today, David.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's my pleasure being here.
So for those who don't know you, even in the limited way I know you, but those who don't know you at all, talk about a bit yourself, where you're from, and what you do.
Sure. I've lived in Maryland almost my entire life. I lived in Prince George's County my entire life. Went to school at University of Maryland for my undergraduate in advertising and my graduate school at University of Baltimore in communications. I've been a volunteer with the Prince George's County Fire Department since 2001, post 9/11. Currently, I'm the Vice President for Digital Transformation at ICF. ICF, for those of you who don't know, is about a 7,000 person global consulting firm. Interesting story, ICF was founded in '68 by former Tuskegee Airmen who wanted to help rebuild the inner cities, and ICF actually stands for Inner City Fund. A lot of people think it stands for International Consulting Firm, but it's actually Inner City Fund, and the company over the last 50 or so years has always been focused on doing right by the world, building a safer and more resilient planet, so I'm proud to be part of that mission. And in the CTO's office at ICF, my job is to help bring technology to that mission.
Oh, fantastic. So what brought you to ICF? So, I mean, or into the role you're at in ICF?
Well, my company, ITG, was acquired by ICF back in February of this year. Oddly, before that, I was at ICF and was recruited out of ITG to be their Vice President of Digital Transformation. So I've sort of come full circle. I initially was recruited into ICF by their former Executive Vice President, Ellen Glover, who was also a friend of mine, and she had asked if I could come in and help with some of their recent acquisitions to help sort of bring together companies that they acquired that were maybe more in the commercial space and sort of having them integrate into the federal space. And I guess that was in 2013. And I think since that time, I'm sort of always in that model of integrating different players or companies into the federal space.
So you said you got your undergrad in advertising, which is interesting, and then your master's in communication. How does that equal the IT field?
So I was fortunate enough growing up to be around a lot of tech. I was just telling my son this story the other day. So some of my best friends' dads worked for DARPA, and we were always in and around. They worked in they called it at the time hypermedia, but it was really the forerunner to like multimedia and virtual simulations. So I was always around the latest and greatest, the latest computers, the latest video games, the latest laser printers, Macs, you name it. So I kind of grew up with a little bit of tech in my background. And then when I was at Maryland from '87 to '91, that's when the desktop publishing revolution was just hitting. So because I had grown up with that background with some of the very, very early Macs, and if people remember like Aldus PageMaker and some of the very Corel Draw, like I just had that background. And I would say my very, very first foray, I would say, into tech, in addition to just using tech for our own projects, was I was a computer assistant at the Maryland Design Center lab. So I would teach folks how to use some of these like version 1.0 software packages. And then I went into the field that I studied for, graphic design, again, but still like very technology focused, right? You had to understand how computers work. And back in the day, people remember like you could work on Macs, like you could troubleshoot Macs, you could command line Macs, you could swap things in and out of, like it wasn't today where it's all closed box. You did, again, have to learn a little bit about how computer works. So I was doing that for a long time, and then saw a opening for a position called multimedia specialist at the Library of Congress. Put in an application, didn't think anything of it, and unfortunately, 8 months later, they called me, and this was 1996, and I became one of the very, very first web designers in the federal government. In fact, my websites were featured in Wired magazine and Martha Stewart Living as like the example of a version 1.0 website. And I worked on my very first big IT project was Thomas, the online legislative information system.
Yeah.
So one of my proudest achievements, the team that I was working on, we put all of that legislation online in 30 days. This was, again, 1996, 97, like early days. So,
Wow. That's
yeah.
pretty interesting. I've even used that tool before. So
Yeah,
that's
it was a great idea. It was one of the most popular early internet sites. I was the UX designer on that, but worked with just an incredible team of engineers behind that. And yeah, still one of my proudest achievements.
wow. So you've been around the block a bit, done a few interesting things. So that means you've been in IT and you've seen how we do business. So what is something about the way we do IT today that is something we should look at, reconsider, maybe change it? And that could be, just in IT in general, or even, we both work in the industry federal space, maybe even at how we do business in our space.
Yeah, I would say so. I was a Fed twice, been a contractor. I've also worked in the commercial space. For the Fed side, I'd say, there's just so many, there's too many, I'd say, constraints, rules, things that you have to follow. Some of them are good, obviously, for things like security, but I think some other rules and guidelines definitely hamper innovation, definitely hamper bringing in the best talent, definitely hamper new ideas, right? A lot of it is sort of, a lot of it forces everybody to the median, to the middle, right? Not too risky, not too slow. So it's a lot of compromises. And I just think if there was a way to, and the federal government's done a great job of this in the past 10 years, I would think. In fact, I tell all the new people who want to join the federal government, I was like, man, if I had this environment back in the 90s when I was a Fed, I don't think I'd ever leave, because back in the 90s, while we were freewheeling and such, we didn't have nearly as much sort of, I'd say, support, recognition, understanding, incorporating best practices from the commercial side. So still got a ways to go. If anything, I'd say, make it so that, people who are in Fed IT are encouraged to sort of push the envelope and take risks and bring on hires who may not have, like, I've got a lot of folks since the pandemic who are clamoring to join the federal government, and they open up those ECQs and they just throw up their hands. They go, I'm never getting in. I said, it's unfortunate. These are talented, really talented people. They just don't have the exact sort of experience that's being written. So you could change that too.
No, I would agree with you there. So what about in the way we maybe interact with, since you've been in the consulting space, there's a lot to complain about there in terms of how we do the interactions with each other. Is there something, specific you might call out that we could rethink in how we do our, maybe it's procurement or the way we bring on services?
Yeah, no, I think acquisition is definitely a place where there could be some transformation. In fact, I think you may know Jason Catman from USDA. I think he is one of the most forward-thinking acquisition professionals. I think he runs great procurements, and he does everything within by the book. But he also understands that vendors and government need better dialogue. So everything he does is very transparent. And every time he puts out a solicitation, we know that we've got, we're going to have access to the equal amount of access to information. We know we're going to have important dialogue with important people right up to the point where, he deems it that we can't. But at the same time, we'll be privy to other conversations. And to him, it's just a better outcome for both. I think he actually did a session on this at the last ELC. But no, at the end of the day, the government gets a better product. Vendors get a fair shake at going after, and I think he's one of those people that I would like to see his model replicated if we could across the government.
I would agree. So, where do you see yourself? Where do you see ICF going here in the the near future? Beyond COVID future. In terms of how you guys are growing and where you're headed.
Yeah, I mean, ICF has always been in the nexus of, again, I said, making the world a safer, more resilient place, but we've always been strong in the environment, health and human services. We also have a digital marketing arm that obviously supports this mission. So I think we're in a good position to help the government and other and commercial clients tackle some of the big challenges we have coming up, especially around the environment. And so I see more opportunities there. Obviously, it's a crowded field, but I think we've got good differentiators where we're at. And I think that the company is smart in its acquisition, so it's always looking to make sure it's got its bases covered. And yeah, again, we're not one of the behemoths. We're not a small company. I think we're right-sized. Oh, that's another thing I want to talk about. What can we change? I think there needs to be a place for mid-sized companies in IT. I think that's a place that's you're missing out on a lot of innovation and delivery and good talent. Just too much of it's sort of bifurcated, either large business or small business. But not to digress, I think ICF is a smaller or large, but I think we're in a good position to help the government meet some of its demands coming up.
No, I think that's an interesting point you make. I mean, you're right. There's a big emphasis on some of the large, the Lockheed Martins, Booz Allens of the world, right? The very large firms that have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And have quite a diversity of portfolio. And then you're right, the government does a lot of help to small businesses as well with the set aside program, but that middle tier is kind of lost in the lack of name recognition in some cases, but not the same benefits of being small.
Yeah. Again, I know great firms out there who have just graduated, and it's not as if suddenly overnight they became unable to compete or deliver. They're the same company. They're just no longer in that size standard, and now they have to dilute themselves by sort of putting themselves at a prime position, and I think it's unfortunate. Yeah,
that is unfortunate. Well, that's very interesting. So I want to thank you, David, for joining me today. I mean, we just want to kind of your story is interesting. You've come from a different background into IT, which I think is interesting, and your volunteering at the fire department is amazing. So thank you for your service.
Thank you for having me.